So 2 weeks ago, Aaron talked about those overly needy people. And then last week, we talked about those manipulative people. And then next week, we're going to talk about those critical people, those people that pick. But I think it's important that we started every other week, and how I think we need to start today is reminding ourselves that this series isn't about calling out and judging other people, because at times we are also those people. Yes. And God loves those people. So even when it's hard, we need to love those people. And we need to learn ourselves enough to identify and grow when we are those people. My name is Emily Scott, and I am the Guest and Next Steps Director. And today we are going to be talking about those hypocritical people. Those people that say one thing and then do something completely different. Like, I say that getting plenty of rest is important, but then every night I somehow end up on my phone and spend way too much time on it before I go to bed. The word hypocrite comes from the Greek word hypocrite, which means an actor wearing a mask. Someone who can put on a chosen persona, and then whenever they want, they can take off that persona or mask afterwards. For example, I'm pretty sure that my 18-month-old believes that my husband Kyle and I are health nuts, because we limit the number of sweets he's allowed to have. We have convinced him that kale is delicious, and we've also convinced him that soy yogurt is a dessert. Meanwhile, when he's not looking, I remove that mask, sneak over to the cabinet, and eat handfuls of chocolate chips, while my husband believes that Doritos are a necessary part of his diet. Now, while this is relatively harmless, there is real danger in being hypocritical. Because do you know the number one thing I hear from my non-Christian friends about the church? Christians are such hypocrites. And it's true. Because I'm sure we all know that person that is holier than thou in some settings, but then they are unfaithful to their spouse, or racist or derogatory towards women. Or the person that uses the mask of praying for someone by saying, well, bless their heart. But it's really just an avenue for gossiping. Or the people who go on about their deep faith and how much they love Jesus and how much Jesus loves them and how much God has done for them personally. But they don't care about people. They don't care about people living in poverty, or people fighting addiction, or people who don't see the world 100% the way that they do. Non-believers sniff out our hypocrisy so fast when we say one thing, put on that mask, and then later take it off and do something completely different. So we need to address our own hypocrisy, and we'll do that today. But first, how do we minister to, care for, and love those hypocritical people in our lives? Those people that drive us crazy, because they drove Jesus crazy too. In Matthew 15, when the religious leaders asked Jesus why he was not following the Jewish tradition, he said, "You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." Jesus is upset that essentially people are talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So the first question that we have to address today is, how do we know when we should get involved when someone is being hypocritical? In Paul's letter to the Galatians in chapter 2, he calls out Peter for being a hypocrite and provides us a guide of when and how we should address hypocrisy. So previously in this letter, we know that Peter has been ministering with a group of circumcised Jews. And at the same time, Paul and his friend Barnabas had been working with the uncircumcised Gentiles. And at this point in the book, they are coming together to share a meal. And in verses 11 through 13, this is what Paul has to say. "When Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood self-condemned. For until certain people came, he used to eat with Gentiles. But after they came, he drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcised fraction. And then other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. Sharing a meal was an important political, symbolic action during this time. And Peter had eaten with these people before. They had broken bread and shared stories. However, at some point during the meal, Peter was worried that people were going to start judging him for sharing this meal with those people. And he started to pull back. And he basically was signifying that he didn't think that these two groups of people could come together for a meal. Yet Jesus' ministry, the very ministry that Peter had been trying to share for at this point 20 years, was that the table was open to everyone. So in that moment, Paul calls out Peter because this one action of separating among these people, it undermined everything that Peter had been preaching about for the past 20 years. But I think perhaps even more importantly, Paul calls Peter out because his hypocrisy directly harmed someone. He excluded a group of people from feeling welcomed and accepted, and he enticed others to do the same. So when I was in college, there was a group of us that almost hung out every single weekend. But, anytime there's a big group, there's always some, tension within the group because there was one individual that really didn't like another individual that was in the group. And, it started off pretty subtle. Every once in a while, he would make a joke or he'd kind of say a questionable comment. But it was all still pretty subtle. And, I didn't want to rock the boat of this group that was forming in college. I didn't want to be the one to rock anything, so we kind of just ignored it. However, as time went on, I've started to become more blind, even as the comments got worse. The jokes had a little bit more of a dig, and it even started to get more into bullying. I'd just become really blind to it at that point. And it wasn't until another friend in this group came up to me and confronted me and said that I was being mean to this individual. And at first I was really defensive when this friend came up to me because I wasn't the one making these comments. I wasn't the one making these jokes. But I discovered that he was right, and I needed to be called out because by not standing up for our friend, I was directly part of something that was hurting somebody else, somebody that I even considered a friend. So while there's no rule book for exactly how we should deal with hypocrisy in our life, I think that Paul gives us some really good examples here and 3 things to consider when we see hypocrisy. The first is that it needs to be somebody that we know personally. So we really don't need to be calling out hypocrisy on social media because this really needs to be a face-to-face conversation. We need to point out hypocrisy if their actions or words hurt or exclude somebody else. Jesus tells us to care for the least of these, which means having solidarity with those people that are often hurt by hypocrisy. And finally, we need to deal with hypocrisy by calling people in to a new understanding instead of calling people out to prove a point. So if we are going to get involved, we need to do so with love. We need to show them how to live without that mask and call them into a different way of life. So while this is great, so now Paul has given us these great examples of how to handle hypocrisy when we see it, which is important. But I think the harder task when it comes to hypocrisy is seeing it within ourselves. So how do we identify and change and speak to the hypocrisy within us? Because the truth is that it is there. And when it's there and when we have that mask on, it doesn't matter how much good we try to do or how much care we do. If people have seen that mask, anything that we do is suspicious, and it's just not met with that same love. So there are 3 prayers that I want to introduce today that can hopefully help us to pause and focus our minds and hearts on removing those hypocrisy tendencies and replace them with healing and restoration. So the first prayer that we're going to talk about today is, God, help me to major in the majors. So one thing that we learned from Jesus is that we are to major in the majors, not the minors. So in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is upset with the religious leaders because they're getting all the rituals correct. They're making sure everything is in order and they have their check sheet, but they're not caring about people. In Jesus' own words, he says, you are caring more about the gnat in the water, and you've completely neglected that there is a camel in the water. Jesus clearly wants us to focus on the big issues. So this is a true story. Just this week, I was sitting in a doctor's office, and a woman was on the phone in the waiting room talking to somebody, probably a friend, and she was telling them about her church. And she was saying that she could not believe that her church, the parking spot that she has been parking in for years, they decided to turn into guest parking for visitors to the church. And she could not believe that the church no longer let her park in her spot. And she said, clearly, I know where their priorities are now. When it comes to hypocrisy, let's major in the majors. Of course, as Christians, our priority should be about providing hospitality, caring for people, and creating an environment where they know they are welcomed, included, valued, and worthy. And we shouldn't be prioritizing these trivial matters like a parking spot, or the version of the Bible we read, or what we wear to church. God has important life-changing work for us. And when we get wrapped up in the minor things in life and start thinking about ourselves instead of the guest, the abused, the disabled, the disturbed, the neglected, the overlooked, if we miss them, then we've missed the whole point. So when we start to think about ourselves more than others, God, help us to major in the majors. The second prayer we're going to talk about today is, God, help me to not prefer the safety of my own understanding. So I want to make something really clear with this point, that there is a difference in growing your understanding and being hypocritical. So often growth means that our opinions or different things on different topics might change or morph. And sometimes we might not even agree with things that we once held really dear and wholeheartedly. And by nature, we want to surround ourselves with people who think the same way we do. So growth can be scary, because what happens if I outgrow the people that are around me? So I'm not counting, but in exactly 20 days, I graduate from seminary with my Master's of Divinity. Oh, well, thank you. I should say, thank you very much. I should say I still have 2 papers to write. So if I pass those papers, then I graduate from seminary in 20 days. But my faith now looks a lot different than it did 5 years ago when I started my journey into seminary. For me, what seminary kind of felt like was I was so excited to go. And I kind of picture it as I had this beautiful vase, right? And this was my faith. This was my understanding of Jesus, the very reason I was going to seminary, because I thought I had it together and I was just going to learn how to share my faith, right? So I had this beautiful vase, and I walked into seminary and I said, I am excited to be here and I'm ready to learn. And all of the professors looked at me and said, great, and they threw my vase on the ground. And it shattered into hundreds of pieces. And I've spent the past couple years picking up those pieces. And while there were grueling parts of that, there were days that I was frustrated, I was confused, I was searching, and days that I wished I could just have my perfect vase back of what I understood and how it used to be. The result of all of that has been that some of those pieces that I thought were so important needed to stay on the ground. And I was able to make room to add new ideas and new theologies and new understandings and create a deeper understanding of my faith, something that's just as beautiful. And it doesn't make us a hypocrite to change our opinion even after we grow. So next weekend here, we are going to be celebrating with a group of young people who've been going through confirmation. And we're going to be celebrating with them about what their faith means and as they take this affirmation that Jesus is in their life. However, when they stand on this stage and take their vows, we don't expect them to believe this forever. Instead, what we hope for them is that this is the story that they wrestle with forever. We should constantly be wrestling with the story of Jesus because it is the greatest story that has ever been told. So no matter if you're wrestling, if you even believe in Jesus, or if you're wrestling with how to apply this to your life, let's keep wrestling. Because let's not get comfortable with this pretty vase. Even though it's scary, because we're not sure what we might look like or what it might look like when we're done, we need to be willing to throw what we believe down on the ground and see what's important enough for us to pick back up. God, help us to not prefer the safety of our own understanding. The final prayer for us today is, God, help me to be real. And I'm going to be pretty blunt with this prayer, because if we're ever going to be able to see when we are being hypocritical and how to help those in our lives who are hypocrites, God wants us to learn to be comfortable with the real versions of ourselves. So I think in today's world, not only is hypocrisy a mask, I think it often disguises itself as a filter. You know, we are so consumed as a society with creating this perfect picture and then turning the camera and not being real about our struggles and our demons and our shortcomings. So I remember when we were younger, my parents had hired somebody in town to come to our house every other week to help clean the house a little bit because my mom was staying home with 4 kids. But I always knew when it was the day that she was coming because my mom would start scurrying around the house and cleaning, and we were told, throw everything in your room and shut the door. And why? Because it would be crazy that the person that is coming to our house, that we are paying, is coming to our house to clean, sees that it does in fact need to be cleaned. Scandalous. But you know, oftentimes I don't think church is much better. Church should not be a spiritual Instagram of us putting on this filter that we have it all together. You know, we gather in this place and exchange pleasantries of, oh, I'm fine, how are you, I'm good. But yet in this very room, we're surrounded by crosses where a man was hung, beaten, and suffered on our behalf. Scandalous. If we are going to be real, we need to hold each other accountable and drop the filter. We need to come to church as we are and encourage others to do the same. So come with your fear of death. Come with your desperation to be loved. Come with your doubts. Come with your broken marriages. Come with your shame. Come with your brokenness. You are not alone. Imagine if church became a place where everyone felt safe and believed that their shortcomings would not only be met with grace from God, but Christians. Imagine if every church became a place where we could become the realest versions of ourselves and drop our filters at the foot of the cross. we might just create a real sanctuary. God, help us to be real. Help me to major in the majors. Help me to not prefer the safety of my own understanding. And help me to be real. These 3 prayers are not easy. It's hard work, and we're not going to get it right every single time. And if one of these prayers has a little bit of an extra sting, if one of these prayers maybe hits just a little bit too close to home, or if you're having it speak to your soul that there is somebody that you need to address in your life about their hypocrisy, lean into that in this final prayer. Because we need to lean into the things that make us uncomfortable. Because the reality is that if we don't address it, if we pretend that hypocrisy is something that those people do, or something that doesn't have to do with us, or something that we get to ignore, we miss out on the life that Christ has in store for us. A life that isn't about putting on a mask or a filter, but a life that is real, authentic, and freeing. A life that can have restoration and healing. And a life we might not even be able to imagine yet. Let's get there together as the church.